Hey, Lauren, welcome to Success with Soul.
Hi, Kate. Thanks for having me.
I am so excited for our conversation today. I was referred to you by a friend, actually, somebody who's been on the podcast as well. And when I went to your website, I just immediately was like, oh my God, I have to have her on the show. And I've been looking forward to our conversation so much. We, booked out pretty far in advance. So it's been something I've been eagerly awaiting. And, we've been talking a lot more about things like the patriarchy and white supremacy and some of those more uncomfortable but so important conversations. And I know today's going to be a really juicy episode.
Yay. I'm really excited as well. I feel like I looked at when we booked and it was only in March, but it
Okay.
feels like
Yeah, it feels like it's
so long
been,
ago. I guess
yes.
that was like almost 2 months ago, but still, it feels
Yeah.
like pandemic is just like such a time warp.
Yeah. Well, and my podcast copywriter who helps me with outlines and writing, show notes and all that stuff. I have a note from her here that says, "Oh my God, have you seen her website? Her homepage is so bold. I love that she uses the word fuck. Definitely seems like she embodies radical courage."
Oh, yay. Yeah. That was like yeah, like my headline is like, you're fucking brilliant. And
Yeah.
um, I went back and forth. And of course, my parents are like, I don't think that should be on your
Yeah.
headline. And I'm just like, oh, if people have a problem with the F bomb, they probably don't want to work with me
That's right.
because it's like one of my power words.
Same, and it's so funny. My son is 2.5, and I just found out this week that he has been cursing at school a little bit. And I was thinking, oh my God, I've said the F word so many times in front of him. I'm a terrible mother. What have I done? And then it turned out it was like basically a made up curse word that, I mean, it's kind of funny, but I was just thinking like, yeah, I just feel like I don't think I could live without the F word.
I feel like there's a lot of power in it. Actually, my freshman English in high school teacher,
Mhm.
she went to Cal Berkeley and was an English major. And her thesis was on the word fuck and how it's like one
Really?
of the most versatile words in the
Yes.
English language. And I think there's a lot of power in it. Some
Yeah, because
people
I
don't
mean,
agree with me.
yeah, I know. My parents would be like horrified to hear me say this, but I'm just like, well, you know what? It's me, and I have the same thing. Like whether it's saying like, okay, maybe don't be so bold, or don't come out and like be so opinionated, or things like that. Or I have my parents have said, even recently, my dad said, you really speak only to women. Maybe you should speak to men too, and your sales might go up because you'd have a larger audience. And I'm like, I don't think you get me and marketing.
Yeah, I know. I think that when people get into business, their initial thought is like, oh, I need to cast a really wide net.
Yes.
And like, I need to make myself like as approachable to as many people as possible. And I think if you're like Target or, Macy's, maybe
Right.
that is true. But even those companies have an audience. And
Yeah, Target and
my
Saks aren't targeting the same people.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And my audience uses the word fuck. And so I put it right on my website so that people can see that I'm their people.
That's right. Okay, well, I love it. It's a good lesson in being you and attracting the right people, and intentionally repelling the people that are like, it's okay if you're not for me, but now we know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Okay, so I love that your kind of title, so to speak, is feminist business mentor, which I feel like is so powerful in itself too. And like I said, we've talked about the patriarchy before on the podcast. We've had several episodes recently, especially. But for anyone who isn't familiar, if this is your first time tuning in, how do you define the patriarchy?
Yeah. So thank you for asking this question. I think that when people see that I'm a feminist business mentor, or when I say like, we're here to smash the patriarchy, they think that that I hate men,
Yeah.
and it's quite the opposite. I do not hate men. And when I define the patriarchy, what I'm talking about is a system. It's not an individual person. It is a structural system that teaches us to accept authority, to um, to stay sort of in our very small prescribed lane. And that really is about centralizing power to particularly cishet white men. And like, it's very much like a pyramid scheme in that, you know, there is like sort of these like points of ultimate power, right? In the United States, like the president is like the ultimate patriarch, right? If you go to the UK, right? Well, we have a queen. There's a queen over there. But like the idea is that the king is the ultimate patriarch.
Yeah.
And the way that I see it is that like it's not like there are law. I mean, yes, the laws and the sort of governmental systems are in place to prioritize the needs of men, and specifically white men in this country. But it's more than just the laws, right? It's cultural. We are taught like not to question our parents. We're taught to, you know, one of the things that I was actually just talking about yesterday is how like we're not supposed to be selfish. We're not supposed to put ourselves first. And specifically women are taught to give fully of themselves and to just pour into their families, their friends, their communities, and are really taught that like putting themselves first is selfish and is bad. And so I think this is kind of like looping back around. The patriarchy is a system. It's a cultural system. It is definitely woven into our government. But ultimately it's about control. And, you know, I don't really even think that the patriarchy is all about like uplifting all men. I actually think it's about like uplifting very specific men. And if there is a structure in place, then those specific people who are hoarding power really only have to control the white men. And then those white men can assert their power to the people who are in relationship with them. And it's really this like trickle down effect of hoarding power. So I feel like that was kind of like a spiral, which is how I how I work.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting. I totally agree. Like, I think when the patriarchy and feminist and words like that can be triggering to people and even to women. And I think we're sometimes like too afraid to even look at what that might mean for us because of what it could actually start to unravel in our own lives.
Sure.
But that being said, I feel like there is also this misconception that if you are feminist or if you are trying to smash the patriarchy or talking about dismantling white supremacy and, you know, other forms of systems of oppression, people are always like, oh, you're just like a man hater. And like it's not about that. And as you said, I don't actually believe that the patriarchy is really serving most men because it's these very narrow definitions of gender and of what power, who should be in power, you know, no vulnerability, no weakness, no emotions. Like it's denying us, men included, of the complete human experience. So I'm glad that you made that distinction. And the other thing you said reminded me, I just read this awesome book called Burnout. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
This book has come up like 5 times in the last 36 hours.
oh my gosh, so funny.
I haven't read it yet. It's on my like, I've like read a lot about the book.
Yes.
And I think they were on the Brene Brown podcast.
Oh, good. I'll have to listen to that because I
Yeah.
am another Brene fan as well. But they talk about in this book this thing called human giver syndrome. And it's basically what you just defined as like women in particular are taught to give everything we have away to everybody else, leaving nothing for ourselves. And that anytime we, you know, feel like even just talking about like self-care or putting yourself first in one small way, that it's like, it's the patriarchy. It's that system that's like, you can't do that because you got to give everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I do want to just make like a quick distinction around when I'm talking about feminism. This kind of goes back to like being a man hater or like being only about women's rights, right? And we know that like gender is a spectrum. And I've talked about this pretty like at length in my content. But my definition of feminism is about creating a world where all people have like equitable access to self-expression, to agency, to joy, to freedom, to pleasure. And so like, I'm not opposed to the fact that like maybe there's space for a little bit of language shifting around what feminism is,
Right.
or maybe even that word will evolve. For now, the people that I have been learning from are holding down this reality that feminism isn't just about women's rights. It's really about the um, sort of deconstructing the patriarchy. And like what we just said, patriarchy isn't just about men's rights, right? The
Right.
patriarchy is about funneling power to very specific people.
Yeah.
And my version of feminism is about deconstructing that
Yeah.
and bringing us to a place where all people can give and receive in a way that is equitable, in a way that serves them, and in a way that really uplifts all of us.
Right.
And I just wanted to make that distinction because I think you're right that the word feminism is triggering and sometimes even just confusing, even for women.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Thank you for making that distinction. And while we're on the subject of kind of definitions, there's something else I'm excited to talk with you about too, where you talk about the capitalist routine. And I'm wondering if you can explain what that means as well. It kind of fits in with what we're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. So, um, I talk about being anti-capitalist, which I think is really confusing for people who are business owners, and especially for people who are like looking at me, who is a business owner, who helps other business owners. Um, and so the thing about capitalism is that there's a lot of sort of like romanticism around it. The fact that like capitalism is sort of seen as the opposite of communism, which we have seen in many situations not be very effective and be quite harmful for a lot of different communities. And so I think
Capitalism or communism?
we've seen communism be very harmful.
Yeah,
And so we see capitalism as this opposite.
right.
And what we are also learning is that binaries actually don't exist. And so when I talk about the capitalist routine, what I'm talking about is like kind of what we were just talking about, it being like human giver syndrome,
Mhm.
right? It's this system, right? Capitalism is a system of extraction, of maximizing profits, whatever the cost.
Cost. Yeah.
And it's really like just woven into every aspect of our society. We're taught like, how can we maximize our productivity? How can we maximize our profits? How can we, you know, limit the expenses, right? And so I think of like just the most basic example of like capitalism is how we can go to McDonald's and buy a burger for 99 cents. And the government has subsidized that so that we can get that burger for 99 cents. The burger should cost us $12. It really
Mhm.
should. And so, if the sort of romantic capitalism, where it's a free market, where everyone's getting paid based on the work that they put in, and everyone can sort of pull themselves up by their bootstraps, we should be paying $12 for that burger. But we're not, because it's been subsidized. And so, what happens is that certain people are actually getting paid what they deserve. But the people who work at McDonald's, right, the employees, the people who are serving that burger, are still putting in a high level of work. But because that burger is only 99 cents, they're actually not able to be paid what the people who are, being subsidized by the government with this for the beef. And so that's kind of like a roundabout example, but basically the issue with the capitalist routine is that it's that same thing of the patriarchy. Certain people are extracting really high value. Certain people are getting a lot of the resources, and the people who are actually doing the labor, so anyone in the workforce is essentially not able to access that level of wealth, that level of resources, and it keeps us in this loop of always trying to work harder, always trying to like, oh, if I could just work, I'm sure you've heard this, like if there were just 36 hours in the
Yeah.
day, right? If there was just a
Mhm.
few more hours in the day, I could like work a 14-hour shift and still get sleep. And then maybe at, $20 an hour, I could maybe someday buy a house. And there's this loop of like, how productive can we be?
Mhm.
How much can I extract? And it kind of is, it's really heartbreaking for me because I see really good people who have really good intentions replicating this system. And there's a culture, especially in the online space, of hiring people in other countries to do our admin and paying them $4 an hour. And it's like, oh, but the living wage there is $3.50. So $4 an hour is like actually 50 cents
They're so
above.
happy with that.
Right. And like,
Yeah.
I've actually worked with people in Singapore and in Bangladesh, and they're like, actually, no, like that's a myth. Sure, like the living wage is like, if you look at the average living wage, but how many of those people are living in what we would consider poverty?
Right. Exactly.
And so this is like the long answer about the capitalist
That's
routine,
okay.
but the
I like
capitalist
long answers.
routine is this process or the system where we give ourselves permission to overwork ourselves, to overwork the people who support us in doing our work, and we prioritize profit over everything else.
Yes.
And I also talk about this business as usual paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
And that is sort of, capitalism is like a system. The business as usual paradigm are like the practices. They're like the actual things, the different things that we're doing with it. And I think specifically in the online space, which is where most of the people that I work with are building online businesses.
Yeah.
It's again, that sort of driver to maximize our profits, even if it means, hiring someone for below the living wage, or, spiritually bypassing because it's an effective way of selling, or culturally appropriating because it's trendy.
Right.
And so it's like all of these things have been accepted and have been normalized, and they're not good for us.
Right.
They're even the person who is sort of profiting off of these practices, at the end of the day, that those profits are like contributing to an illusion of power. And it's
Yeah, it
just
feels like
not.
it's like bankrupting our soul in the process. And
Yes.
yes, you might have all the money, but I feel like most people still feel empty at the end. And
Right.
yeah, that explains why. I mean, there's a reason why the cliche of like money can't buy happiness exists, because it's like, well, we've been taught that it can, but what we've seen over and over and over again is that no matter how much money you have, it's not a guarantee of being happy or not.
Right.
And yeah, and I love what you shared about, we've been taught that everything is binary, but in fact, binaries don't exist. And I think that's exactly like what the patriarchy does, is that it teaches us it's either yes or no, black or white, on or off, everything is either or. And in fact, in reality, there's so much both and that exists. And
Yes.
trying to say, I've even had this conversation. I have a great friend who we have often uncomfortable conversations with, where we can admit to each other, like, yeah, people are talking about this. I don't really know what it means. Like, can you help me? And so one thing she asked me recently was, you said toxic capitalism in in a recent email. Like, what do you actually mean by that? Because I'm sure you're not against capitalism. And I'm like, no, but there's nuance to everything. And I don't think you can be, I'm trying to figure out like the best way to say this. I don't think too much of anything, I think, is, generally speaking, not good for us. Even vitamins, you can overdose on vitamins.
Even water.
Yeah, you can become,
Even
exactly.
clean water. Right.
Exactly. So I feel like it's this hyper masculinity, hyper capitalism, where it's like you said, it's profit over people. It's profit at all cost. And that's more, at least that was my definition when she asked me. It was like, no, I think it's, yes, I'm pro capitalism. I'm pro making money and, giving people opportunities and all of that, but to a point. And there's nuance in there. So do you believe there's such a thing as ethical or conscious capitalism?
I think that in definition, there is a potential for ethical capitalism. I don't think that the way we are currently operating, I don't think it's kind of how we're calling for the abolition of police, and how when we say abolish police, we're not saying we don't want anyone to help us take care of our communities. What we're saying is the current system is so toxic that there is no reform. We need to scrap it and go to the drawing board, or maybe maybe like go to the drawing board and then like abolish when we have a new plan. I'm still learning about abolition, and so I don't want to like speak too much about that. But my feelings on capitalism is that the way we currently see it in practice is incredibly toxic, and that the fact that we have billionaires, lots of billionaires actually, and then people who work for those billionaires can't afford their medications, can't afford rent, can't put food on the table. That is unacceptable to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I want to say that like I'm not against profits. I'm not against building wealth and having resources and, you know, treating ourselves to you know, a fun weekend where we go get pedicures. And I'm not against all of that. I think that we can do that without manipulating and extracting and oppressing the people who help us get there. And so when it comes to ethical capitalism or conscious capitalism, I'm really weary of that, because I think that the way we see it practiced, we've gone so far away from this like definition of like a free market where anyone can make money to like really it's we've gone to this far extreme where like anyone can make money as long as the people underneath them are working for poverty wages. And I feel like we have I don't know that the process to like move towards an ethical capitalism on a large scale, I don't know that we have time for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. So all of this makes me wonder too, you know, we're talking a lot about, I hate to even call it politics because to me it just feels like human interest.
That's
But
actually how I define politics.
yeah,
I just define politics as like the way we
the
do life
people.
together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, okay, so why do you feel like business and politics belong together? Because there's a lot of people, I'm sure even some that are listening that are like, why are we talking about the patriarchy and capitalism and free markets? I mean, it is a business podcast, but it probably seems a little odd.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great question. I talk a lot about business and politics. And when I say politics, I'm not talking about like partisan politics. And while that definitely plays a part of it, right? There is like a conversation around Republican, Democrat, you know, who's in the White House, who's in Congress. But the reason why I think politics and business are so important, like, first of all, I just want to acknowledge that I do define politics as like the way we do life together, right? The
Mhm.
way that the people do life together. And so to me, whether or not single use plastic is a normal part of our culture is a political conversation.
Mhm.
Whether or not a $7 minimum wage is acceptable is a political conversation. And the places where we see those cultural norms changing is in our businesses. And I think especially for folks who are, you know, have a small business. And when I say small business, I'm talking about like less than 50 employees. That's where we can make so much change. You know, it wasn't like all of the sudden Target and grocery stores across the, like, you know, corporate grocery stores across the country stopped using plastic. No, we saw some really small co-ops stop using plastic. We saw sort of small, just companies really across industries going to more sustainable packaging. And when these larger corporations saw that this shift was not only like good for the planet, but it was also like possible to still make money using this model, then we started to see these larger shifts. And now we see companies like Starbucks and McDonald's coming together to figure out, okay, how can we create a compostable cup?
Mhm.
You know, and I'm sure folks I'm like not, my background is not in environmental studies, but I have seen the pictures and of the garbage island floating in the ocean. And I have been to India where there is no recycling, different parts of India where there's zero recycling process. And those people have no options but to just dump the trash in the valley near their town. And if we can create compostable cups, if we can stop creating single-use plastics, if we can lift the global minimum wage so that people can afford to feed themselves, to get the medications that they need to thrive, then like, why would we not create that? And I think that businesses have to lead the way, because we do live in a largely, globally, obviously not everybody runs on a capitalist system, but it's pretty largely a capitalist economy on a global scale.
Mhm.
And so because capitalism is the sort of main thread that we see running through most of our global economies, I think that we have to think about how can we as business owners, whether we are, solopreneurs just doing it on our own, or we have a small team, or we have a big team, we have to be thinking about how can we make our work more sustainable, more equitable, and how can we center, I talk about, you might have heard of the 3 Ps, or if you're listening, you might have heard about a 3P bottom line, which is where we think about profits, people, and the planet. And that is like a great place for us to be starting to think about the way we run our businesses. Like, what is the impact of my work on the planet? How does my work impact the people that I work with, but also the people that are in my community? And then how do I make a profit doing that?
Mhm.
I like to add a 4th P, which is about pleasure. And it's like, how can we create something that feels good? How can we create a business that not only, centers the planet, centers the people, makes us a profit, but it also, and this goes back to what we were saying at the beginning of the recording around, um, you know, being our souls being bankrupt because even though we have lots of money, but if like we build businesses that are truly sustainable, we also have to be creating businesses that allow us to thrive. And again, there's that spiral that I go through. But I think when we talk about business and politics, what we have to be thinking about is like, how are our businesses impacting the people? How are our businesses improving the way that we do life with our communities? And I just think that business and politics are inherently connected. And a lot of people disagree with me, but I will probably stand. That's where I'm like
That's
putting my
your stake
stake
in
in
the
the
ground.
ground.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. So many good things in there. One thing that came up for me when you're talking about kind of it starts with corporations. And this is something I've been really trying to unlearn diet culture, and which is just another system of oppression.
Yes.
Um, and one of the things that has come up, Christy Harrison is somebody, she wrote the book called Anti-Diet, and she has an amazing podcast called Food Psych. And I've been listening to, just completely binging her podcast lately. And she talks about how even just looking at this from like a food standpoint, that we could say, oh, I'm not going to eat meat anymore because meat is is a big greenhouse gas emissions are largely attributed to raising animals. And or, oh, I'm not going to use Ziploc bags anymore. All these things that are really great things for us to do individually,
Sure.
but that the vast majority, and I'm not going to get the stat right because I don't remember, I'm terrible with numbers, but it's like well over 70% of greenhouse gas emissions and things that are harming the planet come from corporations, not from the individual. So while it might make you feel good that you're like doing your part, and I've even been guilty of telling people like, vote with your dollars. It's like, you as an individual can't reverse this. But if we start going to the corporations and saying, hey, McDonald's, you got to start using compostable cups. We've got to change your farming practices of where you're getting your beef. That's what's going to make, the biggest difference. And so I just kept thinking about that when you were talking about, yeah, starting with corporations. And I don't think it like should let us off the hook of making, conscious individual decisions, but
Sure.
I think it also kind of releases the pressure and shows us where to focus. Just like in our business, when we have to figure out what are the things we're doing that actually move the needle, it's like, is your use of not using Ziploc bags anymore really going to cut down on all of the pollution and the issues that we're having with the environment and global warming and everything? Or is it better that we go to the Ziploc manufacturer and figure out something there?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. This brought up so much for me.
Mhm.
First of all, I also tell people vote with their dollars. Money is power in the system that we live in. And so I think we should be voting with we can vote with our dollar. And when, I was vegan for years, for political reasons largely. And I'm not a vegan anymore. And there might be vegans who are listening who are like, what the hell? But I'm not a vegan anymore. But what I realized is that this pressure on individuals to take the responsibility
Right.
of these global issues, not only is it like my decisions aren't going to change the world. I do believe that little grains of sand ultimately create mass, and that like yes, we should be making decisions that move us towards justice, that move us towards freedom, that move us towards collective power. And when we take responsibility, we are letting the corporations off the hook.
Right.
And it's sort of like this thing of like, they talk about how when we post on social media about like good deeds that we've done, it sort of like gives us that serotonin hit of like, oh, we're good people.
Mhm.
And so it sort of like lets us off the hook of like maintaining that activity of like doing good deeds. And I think it's the same thing. Is like when we take responsibility over these large issues of injustice, or unsustainable practices, or really trying to like do our best to create change, then it like almost, that energy is being used to navigate our own world in a system that's not set up for us to live that way, rather than using our energy to hold corporations accountable.
Right.
And I want to bring this back to small businesses, because a lot of the people I work with are not corporations. And I think the way that we have to model that in small businesses, because the corporations have in their minds a lot more to lose on the profit scale.
Yeah.
And so if they can see that small businesses are being successful in not using single-use plastics, or not using or paying a living wage to their employees,
Mhm.
and still making a profit, that's when they see that happening. Corporations are paying attention to what is happening at all levels of business. And when we can lead in a way that centers sustainability, when we can lead in a way that centers um, the well-being of people, we are actually setting an example for these larger corporations.
Mhm.
And yeah, I just think that we definitely individually have a responsibility to, right, there's a supply and demand piece here, right? If
Yeah.
we and we've seen it happen, right? Like 10 years ago, your options were dairy milk or soy milk.
Mhm.
But now there's like 50 plant milks. And it's funny, right now I have dairy milk in my fridge. And I think this is the first time in probably 10 years that I have had dairy milk in my
Oh,
fridge.
wow.
I just like needed it for a recipe, and I mostly use like oat milk or
Mhm.
almond milk. Not because I I mean, partially because I'm like not really down with the dairy industry, but largely because like I just prefer almond milk. But because we have those options, right? Because small companies, or what started as really small companies, gave us those options, now it's mainstream.
Right.
And my husband and I were actually talking the other day about like becoming a sellout, and that culture of like, oh, like you've become so big that you've like sold out.
Mhm.
And I think that like in certain instances that kind of sucks, especially for like early adopters who feel like they were kind of special. But ultimately, like we want things like non-dairy milk to sell out. We
Mhm.
want things like you know, Black women becoming millionaires. We want that to be a movement that is mainstream.
Right. Right.
And so when it comes to, you know, the way that we show up as individuals, the way we show up as small businesses, I think that we should be modeling, and I try not to say shoulds, but I'm going to say it here because I think that, like, I really do believe this. We should be modeling the kind of behaviors, and we should be leading and living into the kind of world that we want to be co-creating for future generations, because corporations are paying attention, and they do have, you know, I said money is power. You look at the companies that have the largest you know, annual revenue, and they really are contributing to the culture that we live in. Right.
Yeah.
And I just think that the more we can demand individually and small bit, like from our small businesses, the more that we can demand sustainable practices become normalized, the less corporations have an excuse to just like keep doing things business as usual.
Right. Right. Okay, so I love this. Let's bring it kind of back now to like super small businesses, because most of the people listening, myself included, we're talking about teams of like 5 or less, generally
Sure.
speaking. So, how do we own our unique brilliance and build our feminist business without perpetuating that the capitalist routine? What are feminist business practices?
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to say that, like, I am learning about this also. I think that culture is evolving always.
Mhm.
And so, just like certain phrases maybe 5 years ago were fine to say, and now it's like, oh, we actually don't say that anymore. It's not because, like, all of a sudden we have like awoken to the injustice. It's like actually culture is shifting. And so I want to say first and foremost that, like, it's not a box that we check off.
Right.
And I know that Trudy LeBron talked about this on one of your episodes about like anti-racism not being a box that we can check off. It's the same thing with our feminist business practices. But what I will say is that my definition of feminism is about creating environments and communities where all people can thrive. And so that's a great place to start, is to ask yourself, am I thriving in my business? Maybe my clients are doing excellent. Maybe my business manager is feeling so good. Maybe she's getting paid high dollar, more than she's ever been paid before. Maybe everyone around me is thriving, but maybe I'm not.
Mhm.
What needs to change so that I can also be thriving? And so I think that's sort of the first step, is like, how do we make sure that everyone in our business, including ourselves, is flourishing?
Yeah.
And it's not, again, not a box that we check, right? That's a process. But just like some really simple sort of like, I guess if we are looking for boxes to check, I would say, you know, checking in with those 4 Ps that I was talking about earlier is a great way to kind of bring some of this feminist values into our businesses. Like, am I making a profit, right? Because profit at the end of the day is about, like, that's what business is about.
Right.
So, like, am I making enough money to pay myself and to pay my employees, even if it's just a few of them? And to like also give back into my community and to reinvest in the people who are sort of paying me to do this work. Also, like, how is my impact on the planet, right? Like, if you are a product run company, like, is there any way you can shift your packaging? Can you offset the cost or the impact of shipping your products across the world? This again, when we go to, so profits, are we making money in a way that sustains us but isn't extractive?
Right.
Planet, where can I make sure that I'm, you know, reducing my carbon footprint? People, do my people feel safe to ask for a day off when they need it? Do my people feel like they're getting compensated fairly for the work that they're doing, right? I just recently saw Chani Nicholas, who is my like favorite astrologer, just sent out an email to her newsletter, basically saying like, we're hiring. here's the benefits that you get if you work with us. And it was unlimited menstrual leave, a personal development stipend. There was a long list of benefits that I was like, damn, I want that job.
Yeah.
And then pretty quickly was like, actually, what I really want is to be able to offer that.
Right.
And so when you're offering unlimited menstrual leave, unlimited time off, a personal development stipend, health insurance, 401k, when you're offering that, that's cutting into profit. But that means that your people are so supported. And then, and like the sort of practical side of that is that there's not going to be a lot of turnover because people are happy working with you.
Right.
And so I just talked about profits and pleasure, or people, planet, and the last one is pleasure, right?
Yes.
And it comes back to like what feels good. If hosting 100-person live course is exhausting for you, like maybe shift your strategy.
Mm-hmm.
If working 8 days a week doesn't feel good, maybe shift your strategy. And it's really about these like small shifts. And one thing I do just want to share when we're talking about feminist business is when it comes to sales and marketing, the biggest thing for me is like, how can we, and this is kind of like hop, skip, and a jump from what we were just talking about, but like, how can we prioritize consent in all levels of our business? And this is a feminist issue because how often are women not given the option, women and really all people not given the option to consent to being givers, to consent to being sold to consent on so many levels. And so if you're just looking for one quick way to make a shift in your business, to move more towards an equitable, justice-centered, feminist lens, just start prioritizing consent. And that can look like, before you send out an email sequence marketing a new product, just like send an email, hey, I'm about to share this cool new offering. If you don't want to receive these emails, you can opt out here. Or in our marketing, in our in our sales calls, asking people, are you okay with me sharing this offering that I think is going to be a really good fit for you?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Just like giving people that option to say like, actually, you know what? I'm okay. I think this isn't really what I want. And it kind of goes against all of the things we've been taught about marketing, right? We're supposed to like sort of slip in the sale. We're supposed to manipulate people with shame and blame and guilt to get them to purchase. But especially if you are in personal development or in healing, or if you're in this realm of like helping people feel better,
Mm-hmm.
using manipulation tactics, using scarcity, using false authority to coerce them into purchasing is actually making more work for you and is the antithesis of what you're trying to offer. And so, I like the 4 Ps, checking in, like, is this profitable? Is this helping the planet? Is this making sure my people are good? And does it feel good? Is it pleasurable? That's one sort of checklist that I go through. And then just like really centering consent
Yeah.
in the way that we show up in our work.
Yeah, I think the consent piece is so interesting and, goes hand in hand, like you said, with kind of these manipulative sales tactics that we've all been taught. And I think what is really interesting is that, I've heard clients of my own and students in my groups say things like, but if I give them an opt out, then what if everybody takes it? And what I've actually found when I started implementing this is that more people didn't unsubscribe. Like we had less unsubscribes, and I think it was because they felt like I was given the choice and it felt good to them to see, oh, she's about to sell me something. And if I don't want it, I can just tell her no thanks and she won't talk to me about it again.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I think fewer people than you think take the option, even if they're actually not interested, because they're like, oh, I was given the choice and she was honest and transparent and upfront about it. So, not to then make this like its own like reverse manipulation of like, if you do this, your profits will actually go up. But I feel like in practice, that has actually been what I have seen.
I have sold high dollar packages from my consent email.
Yeah.
When I
Interesting.
send the email that says like, hey, I'm really excited. I'm launching this new product or this new offering. Sorry, my earbuds are falling out of my head. I'm launching this new coaching container, or I'm launching this new training program. You can find out all the information here. If you know that this is not a good fit for you right now, or if you aren't interested in receiving more information about this, click here and I'll make sure not to send you any more emails about this
Yeah.
particular offer. I do get people who opt out of that. And often I find in those sales sequences, I like what you were just saying, I don't get as many unsubscribes because people have the option.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also had people email me saying like, I love this.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I want to learn from you.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
they book.
Yeah.
And it's like, again, the point is not to manipulate people. And
Right.
so we want to make sure that like we're
We're
doing
doing
this
it
from
because we want the consent to be there. Like the intention is to give
right,
people choice. But
right,
the bonus is when you start doing things in a non-slimy way, you actually start attracting people even more to you. And
right.
yeah,
Absolutely. And I think I, you know, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, we didn't have access to the level of information that we have now. A lot of our clients, especially if you are working with people who are also in business, we all know the tricks,
right.
right? We've all used them or had them used against us, or we've been in a training course where they taught us how to do that and our gut went, no way, I'm not going to do that.
Mhm.
So we're all way more aware than we were
Right.
10, 15, 20 years ago. And so those tactics actually don't work anymore.
Right.
Not in the way that they used to. And I just think it's really interesting. I was on a podcast a few months ago, and the woman who was interviewing me, her husband was or is a psychology researcher, and she shared with me that one of that like most like large funded psychology research initiatives that have gone down in the last like 25 years have all been about how to effectively market to people. And
Mm,
they're all about how can we effectively manipulate people into purchasing.
interesting.
And so all of the way that we are understanding our brains these days is how can we market to people? How can we extract profit from people? And I just want to like, for folks who are listening, I want to say that it is a little bit of trial and error. We do have to sometimes try a marketing practice that maybe hasn't been normalized yet. And maybe that means that our sales do go down a little bit. I know for myself, when I really shifted and really committed to this, I did see a little drop in my income. And that's really scary and was really hard. And I didn't feel like shit
Right.
anymore.
Right.
Like I didn't feel like a jerk.
Right.
I felt really good. The sales that I did get, I knew that I was in integrity.
Right. Right.
And so if integrity is something that you are interested in, if you value integrity and you value the people that you are working with, and you want to feel good when you go to bed at night, it's worth it to prioritize consent and to lead with vision and values rather than always pressing on pain points, right?
Right.
It it's not always like a smooth trip to the top. And I think that that's true even if you aren't using even if you are using these manipulative tactics, right? It's always going to be hard. There's always going to be a learning curve.
Right.
So we
Well,
might as well
sorry, go
I
ahead.
was just saying, we might as well learn that, and like the learning curve might as well be like learning how to do business in integrity.
Right. Yeah, totally. And, sometimes people are like, well, if I'm not poking at people's pain and like highlighting where they're struggling and how I can like solve their problem, then how am I marketing? And one way that I have found is like show them positive, what's possible, what could, like there's some people, and I think Jenna Kutcher actually had a podcast episode on this that was like, I'm trying to remember. It was like you're either the carrot or the now I can't remember what the analogy was, but there's two types of marketing. And one is like poke at people's pain. And one is like show them possibility, give them that, like, what this could be you. This is like, and yeah, just like continuing to say, I keep going back to the just like poking at somebody's pain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The other thing you shared that really resonates with me too is this focus on pleasure and what feels good, and thinking about, I mean, this is what I have done in my business a lot in the last couple of years is, if you are a course creator, most of the gurus out there are teaching you how to live launch your course, and you do it a few times a year. And I fucking hated it. It was so exhausting and depleting. I didn't feel like I was meeting my people where they were, that it was like, you have one time a year that you can buy. And if it's not the right time for you, you should buy anyway, because otherwise you're screwed and you can never get in. And, all these things. And I felt terrible. And so I switched to an evergreen funnel system instead. And now I'm like, I'm never launching again, because this feels so much better for myself and for my people. And it's less work. And it's like, it was a lot of work to set up. And then I set it up, over a year ago now. And it's like, it just runs in the background, and it frees me up to focus on other things that are important to me, whether that's work or personal life. I can now go to my yoga classes in the middle of a work day and take a nap and, slow down when I'm on certain phases of my cycle. And that's what is like what's needed. And I know you have claimed that you're also never launching again. So I love this. And I want to see if you can share more about, so what's your business model these days without launching?
Yeah. So a few things. I want to shout out to Kelly Deals, who is a feminist copywriter and actually who I have trained with. I want to shout out to Angelica Johnson and Laura Eastwood, who are really kind of breaking down these sort of, like you said, like guru teachings.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm learning about launching, or what I have kind of like unpacked for myself around launching, is that like the definition of launch, or the energetics of the word launch, is to use like all of your energy to like fight gravity and like put yourself into orbit. And I'm just like, that is exhausting.
Yeah.
Think
I
about
love
how
that
much
analogy.
think
Yes.
about how much fuel they have to use to get a space shuttle to like move into orbit. So much fuel.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I don't have that.
Mm.
And so what I have shifted to is just, I still do like multiple, I guess what you would call launches, but what I've focused on now is just like, I have enrollment periods.
Mm-hmm.
The door's open. And if you're interested, come on in. And instead of feeling like I have to like talk so much, like, there's like a 3-week pre-launch and then a 7-day launch phase. And it's like a month of my
Just
life
kill me.
is
It's
just like
terrible.
exhausting and draining. And, instead of that, I'm just like showing up in a way that feels really good all the time.
Yeah. And you don't have to be selling all the time. That's the thing that I love, is like, now I'm just providing free value with the podcast and other things that I'm sharing, whether it's in social or in my emails or on the blog or whatever. I'm just like, here's some free value that I think might help you. And then like the selling part I don't have to come on every day and like, let me tell you about my course again. Are you going to get in? Are you going to like
Right.
TikTok? And I don't know. I just can't do it.
Yeah. And I think that, this like launch model comes from really large organizations, right? When we see like the Tony Robbins or the Marie Forleos, or we see these like sort of celebrity coaches launching, they have multi-million dollar teams,
Mm-hmm.
you
Right.
know?
They're not
And
launching as a
like,
solopreneur.
right.
Yeah.
And so what I am, I'm very much in love with the model of just like, here are my offerings. The doors are open. When the doors are closed, you can get on the wait list and you will be the first to know when the
Yeah.
doors are open again. And like, I'm just going to deliver value. I mean, ultimately the reason why I got into this work, other than like really seeing, some big issues in the way we do online business, was because like I have a lot of ideas. I have a lot of thoughts about the way we can do things differently. And I want to be in dialogue about those ideas and about those new systems and new ways of doing business. I am an Aquarius sun and my North Node is an Aquarius. And so it's all about like humanitarian innovation. And like that is what a lot of what drives me. And so I like sharing content and this like pressure to like shove a ton of content and like make it super high value and super high pressure into like 1 month
Yeah.
just is exhausting to me. I would way rather like take all of that content and stretch it out over the course of the year,
Right.
have people sort of accustomed to receiving high value from me, and then when I open the doors to my program, they're just like, yeah, I want to be a part of this. I want like
Right.
more value than I'm already receiving for free.
Yeah. So good. So, one last question on the topic of related to pleasure, I think, but I think one of the ways that we can work in a way that feels good to us is by something that you talk about, bringing your business into alignment with your unique zone of brilliance. And we've talked before on the show, and I know a lot of people have read Gay Hendricks' book, The Big Leap, and he talks
Mm-hmm.
about the zone of genius. So,
Sure.
is this different? The zone of brilliance, is that different than the zone of genius? Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for bringing this up. This is something that I've been kind of in development with, this like concept and this framework for a while. Um, but so the zone of I've read The Big Leap a couple times. It's been a while. It's been a year or a couple of years since I've read it. But the zone of genius, if I remember it correctly, is like you're really good at it and it just comes naturally to you. Is this like zone of genius? And you probably like take some. There's probably some pleasure in there
Yeah.
as well. And the zone of brilliance is similar in that there is like a pleasure piece and there is like a just sort of it comes to you naturally piece.
Right. Your
But
skills. Yeah.
right. Yeah. So it's broken. I break it down into these four main spheres. And like I see it as sort of like a Venn diagram. And there's this like centerpiece that is the zone of brilliance. And that centerpiece is made up of the skill set that you have developed. Right. So it does include the pieces that you've worked really hard to
Mhm.
cultivate. Your unique lived experience, right? The pieces of your life that have contributed to the gifts that you just naturally have,
Mhm.
your pleasure practices, the parts of your life and the things that you do that feel really good. And I think the piece that's maybe most different from the zone of genius that Gay Hendricks talks about is this vision for social and cultural change,
Mm.
right? I think all of us, well, maybe not all of us, I think a lot of people, at least the folks that I'm working with, have a vision for the kind of world that they want to create for the future,
Mhm.
whether that future is for their children or whether that future is for their children's children, right? There's sort of a biological driver in in humans to think about at least creating a world for our children that and when I say our children, I'm not just talking about our bio kids. I'm talking about like the
The
children.
next. Yeah.
um I think that if we leave out this piece of like our vision for social and cultural change, then what we're neglecting is this internal driver to build a better world and to leave the world better than it was when we came into it.
Yeah.
And part of that is sort of excavating and deprogramming from the capitalist routine and from the business as usual paradigm, because we've been taught to think about the world through those lenses.
Mhm.
And so we have to deprogram a little bit from that. We have to start to unpack the behaviors and the beliefs and the patterns that we've been taught and relearn what we actually want, what is truly our vision.
Right.
And that's like not a quick process. I would
Oh.
say like I've been very consciously doing this work of unpacking patriarchy and capitalism for the last decade. And
Mhm.
I'm still finding areas of my life where I'm like, oh, that's it. That's the piece. And then I'm like, oh, wait, there's more to it.
Mhm.
And so your zone of brilliance is kind of, it's moving with you.
Yeah.
And also, I just want to say to folks that like everyone's is unique.
Right.
Everyone has something unique to contribute. And that is this zone of brilliance. is this
Right.
unique contribution that you have that only you can offer in the way that you're going to offer it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's kind of similar to having like figuring out what your why is, but it goes beyond just kind of like, I want this so that I can have, financial freedom or things that are, valiant efforts and like good reasons to do something. But I think it's exactly what you said. I mean, I've been self-employed for 11 years now, and I've been doing what I'm doing currently for the last several years. But it really wasn't until like the end of last year that I feel like my why was always sort of, this sort of vague idea of empowering women and kind of leveling the playing field and giving them freedom and flexibility and fulfillment. And, these things that like they sounded good and they were true, but I feel like towards the end of last year, I really realized how important it was to me to just play whatever small part I could play in dismantling the patriarchy, and really seeing that by encouraging female entrepreneurship as this revolutionary act, like that is what all of a sudden became so clear to me. And then once that happened, I feel like it was so much more enjoyable to show up and do my work. I felt so much more connected to it. I felt more of a purpose in what I was doing. And it wasn't just like, oh, here I go, launching another course again. Like, it felt so different. So I love that you incorporate that into the zone of brilliance. It feels very important.
Yeah, it was a huge shift for me as well. I think, it's become really trendy to have a justice lens. And I'm actually like not mad at that. I'm like, yeah, let's make that a trend.
Yeah.
And also I think we need to come back to this, like, what am I here for?
Mm-hmm.
What is my vision? What is my, purpose? Some people don't like that, but like,
Your
I
legacy.
believe,
Yeah.
yes, I do believe that like we're here. I do believe we're here for a reason. I do believe that like everyone has something contribute. And like sometimes that contribution is like uncomfortable
Mhm.
for a lot of the people that we're in community with. And sometimes that means we have to like, rock the boat a little bit. But if the boat is headed towards an iceberg, which like, sorry folks, the boat is headed towards an iceberg. Like, I
You're
hate to
on the
break it to you.
Titanic. Yes.
Yes, we are on the Titanic, and like we have to use our energy to redirect.
Yeah.
Or there, I don't want to like necessarily end this on just like the most drab note ever, but like if we don't create change, if we don't dedicate ourselves to moving the future generations towards more freedom, more joy, more sustainability, those future generations aren't going to have a life that's worth living. And it's like, sucks. And the sort of high note with that is that like we can create change.
Yeah.
We can make decisions personally and in our businesses that uplift the people around us and that create a stronger foundation for the folks who are coming after us.
Yeah. I love it. I love thinking about like from a legacy lens and thinking like, what future do I want to belong to? And, how can the work continue after I'm gone? This is something that I did a lot of work with in a mastermind I was in last year with Kate Northrup. Um, and then I was redoing all of the copy for some of the emails in a funnel that I have. And, at the same moment as I was thinking about this topic, I got this email from Rachel Rogers. I mean, not personally, it was on her list. And it was called Before I Die. And in it, she kind of just bullet points out like what she wants to accomplish before she dies. And so I thought, I'm gonna do this exercise and just kind of like journal on this. What are the things like if I died, how would the work go on? And what am I really what am I really doing? And I feel like it was that kind of triggered this like cascade of clarity and
Mm-hmm.
purpose. And so I think that's a good note to end it on. If you're
Yeah.
like, yes, what is my legacy? Try writing out 5 things before you die. What do you want to have accomplished? What
Yes.
change do you want to enact? Um, yeah, so good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Lauren. This was
Of
so amazing.
course.
Such a good conversation. And if you're still listening, thanks for hanging in with us till the end. I know we went a little longer than usual, but I could talk to you forever. So
Aw, Yeah, this was great. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you and to share with your audience some
Yeah,
of the
let them
ways
know
that,
where they can find you.
yeah, definitely. So you can find me on my website, laurenelizabethcoaching.com. I spend a lot of time on Instagram, and you can find me there at lauren.elizabeth.coaching. And yeah, like I said, I really love to be in dialogue about these topics. I'm definitely open to learning more. And I kind of make the assumption that everyone has something to teach me. So find me in those spaces and let's talk about how we can do business differently.
Love it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.